But isn't Earth Day just promoting the idea that development needs to be sustainable?
Well, but that assumes that, there's an assumption there that capitalism, that development, that industrial civilization is unsustainable. And this is a view that goes back, to the roots of the environmentalist movement, this idea that somehow we're using up all the Earth's resources, we're running out of everything, running out of oil, running out of, trees, running out of things, and, that we can't sustain this. I mean, they have this image that, if you put bacteria in a petri dish with a small amount of food, they'll breed and eat up all the food, and they'll divide and divide and divide until all the food is gone, and then they'll just crash, and then they'll all be dead. And that's their view of what life is like for human beings on this planet, that we're just tearing up all the resources, and eventually we're all just going to crash. But this, if you look at the history of industrial capitalism, this is completely insane. We have, the kinds of production and wealth that people have been able to create in just the last 200 years are unprecedented in human history. And where did that wealth come from? Those resources have been sitting under the ground, for millennia. The oil and so on has been sitting under the ground forever. What makes those things valuable is the human mind. That's what's gone to produce those values and to create all this wealth. Now, so if you understand that the root of production is the human mind, you see that it's not, the production of wealth is not just about sort of going up and scooping up resources, finite resources, and then using them up. What people have done is they've taken materials in the earth that people saw no value in for, tens of thousands of years, and found ways to make them useful. So people discovered this oil is this black glop seeping out of rocks. For all of human history, that's completely worthless junk until, Rockefeller and all the people go in there and figure out how to make this useful. Now, the thing is that, if you look at the history of resource development, for example, you find that take oil as an example. People have been predicting, that we're going to run out of oil basically ever since we started using oil. And the reason they think that is because they don't recognize this point that the mind is the source of production. They assume that we already, know how much all the oil that exists on the earth, and they can project out how long it's going to last, and they think we're using it all up. But this is not how markets work. This is not how production works. It takes economic, it takes effort and cost to go and look for resources like oil, to go and search for oil reserves. And there's no incentive to find all the oil that exists in the world at any given time. What companies do is they invest the money and they invest the effort to secure reserves out, a certain number of decades, so that they can ensure that they've got enough, for adequate production for as long as they're, in the foreseeable future. And the history of the development of oil is that reserves have been growing, the discovery of new reserves have been growing at a faster rate than production for the entire history of the production of oil. Now, it's true that oil is a finite resource, and someday, we will have exhausted, all of the easily accessible reserves that exist on the planet. But the point is, oil itself is not a value as such. The value is the work that we get out of oil, the things that we use oil for, and there are all kinds of other things that we can replace that with. So, we could use natural gas, we could compress natural gas and use that as a fuel. We could use hydrogen. But the point is that the idea that we're just going to sort of use up all the oil and turn around one day and suddenly realize, oh, all the oil's gone, where did it go? And not have anything left to utilize is ridiculous. This is not the way, self-interested people on a free market operate. They think long range. They look at, the market price of oil, for example, reflects all the factors, including, the long-range prospects for securing future supplies. And when the day comes that you're starting to see that we're nearing the end of oil resources. That'll be reflected in the price of oil long before we ever reach the stage of not actually being able to secure reserves. And the free market, if we have a free market, will find alternatives for the kinds of uses that we need oil for. And I mean, so that is the way in which capitalism is sustainable. If you leave people free to act on the free market, it is a forward-looking, long-range planning, system that integrates all of the thinking and effort and ingenuity that individuals have, to secure sustainable production, sustainable growth ad infinitum.
And you asked in a previous question about what is environmentalism, and this issue of sustainability gives a clue to what it is. Ayn Rand classified it, and I think rightly, as a movement on the left. It's what she called, it's part of the new left as against the old left. So the old left were the socialists, Marxists, communists, who promised that we would have a glorious industrial civilization, that the Soviet Union would so outcompete the US, it would beat it economically, that people would have a higher standard of living, which was a total joke. Should have been known by people at the time, but certainly with the history of the Soviet Union, history of communism, it led to incredible poverty and destruction of actual economic resources. So the new left had a choice. So the Marxist and the communist ideology was revealed to be bankrupt. They could either side with industrial civilization, which they supposedly were in favor of, and said communism will bring us the glories of that and will outcompete capitalism, or they could say to hell with industrial civilization. And the environmentalists, faced with that choice, in effect, have said to hell with industrial civilization. And so now their criticism of capitalism is not that it produces too much, it's that somehow it's going to run out. That at some point in the future, this is unsustainable. You can't, yes, you outcompeted the communists and so on, but at some point in time, for some mysterious reason, it's all going to come crashing down. And there's no, I mean, if you look at the history of capitalism for the last 200 years, it is more and more production, more and more people living on the earth who have a higher standard of living. And if you take that as evidence, there's no reason to think that cannot be sustained. The idea of sustainability, what they project is people are going to have to do exactly the same thing. So in the 19th century, they used whale oil, so we're going to have to keep using whale, and at some point the whales are going to run out. But that is not what capitalism looks like. You don't keep doing the same thing over and over and over. You progress, which means you discover knowledge, you discover new ways of producing things. And as Keith was saying, if oil becomes, it's really hard to find because we've exploited the easily exploitable resources, you develop new sources of energy by discovering new knowledge, such as nuclear power and so on. So 100 years from now, the economy is not going to look anything like it looks now. But it's going to be better if we have a capitalist system. So in that sense, it's sustainable. But that doesn't mean we have to do exactly what we were doing for the next 100 years.
And if I could just add, I think it's worth pointing out that predictions that environmentalists have made on, based on this whole unsustainability idea have been so outrageously wrong. Paul Ehrlich in the late 60s wrote this book, The Population Bomb, and he was predicting that in the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people would be starving to death, that we were going to reach this population crash. And the exact opposite occurred. Population has grown steadily since the time of these predictions. I mean, he said that England wouldn't exist by 1980. I mean, he made completely outrageous things, outrageous predictions that were completely debunked. Completely debunked by reality. He was predicting that America would feel the effects of the population crash and resource scarcity and food scarcity. And what's one of the biggest problems that we're worried about today? That Americans are too obese. So the only way that environmentalists have learned from this is they've stopped making predictions out a couple of decades, and now they say, we have to worry about global warming in 2100. So now all they do is they make predictions that are longer range so that they won't be around when reality debunks them.